Afternoon all. I believe I've overcooked my preparation for presenting this game. There were some deeply fascinating tactical lines. There's notes by Fischer himself as though he's done a detailed post-mortem even of this 5-minute game. So this is from the Herceg Novi blitz of 1970, where Fischer played 22 games. There were 11 opponents, 2 games each. Now against Petrosian that was particularly interesting. Like the Tau encounter, Petrosian, a former world champion, master of prophylaxis, fantastic player for the strategic side of the game, known to sort of prevent attacks before they were even conceived, the preventer, of chess. So what would he do against Fischer playing e4? Well, actually, along with a lot of other games in this tournament against the Russians, they seem to group together to conspire to play the French defence. And it's interesting that later, on Fischer's journey to the 1972 World Championship match, he did particularly well against Sicilians. So why didn't they play the French defence more against him? I guess Taimanov was biased for the Sicilian Taimanov. Okay, so the French defence by Petrosian, e4, e6, and Fischer elects to play the Winawer variation, knight c3. He wasn't usually playing the Tarrasch. But bishop b4, e5, what has he got up his sleeve? So we have the traditional fracturing of the pawn structure in compensation. White has the bishop pair, and the usual Fischer plan in many games is to later play a4 and bishop a3. So an interesting question is how routinely Fischer will play that plan, given it's a 5-minute game with the time constraints. What will be his loss of precision? And the same with Petrosian. What will Petrosian's loss of precision be like? What sort of plans will he be adopting from this position? Well, interestingly here, there's queen c7, which is played. Now, if queen g4, queen c7 does have the perk that the g7 pawn can be indirectly defended, as we've seen in the French defence video recently with Paul Georgiou. But also, black might retain the option of knight ge7 as well, because the queen can have another purpose for attacking c3 later. It seems Fischer wasn't keen on queen g4 here, and in his notes he says, I could have played queen g4 but was influenced against it because Petrosian as black had recently beaten Diez del Corral at the Palma de Mallorca tournament in this line. So Fischer instead plays knight f3. So that classic g7 weakness is like a weakness of the last move, because in the Winawer, black's giving up the dark square bishop. But not only that, with white's pawn wedge, the king side activity is more prominent to have greater effect. And even moves like knight g5 later will have great significance potentially, at least in the variations which Fischer himself looked at. So knight e7, and now we see the classic Fischer plan being adopted, a4. And now a slightly unusual looking move. The knight usually wants to put pressure on d4 and e5 by going to c6. But actually, Petrosian's got another idea up his sleeve here in this 5-minute game. He plays bishop d7. Okay, he's eyeing a4, but that can often be sacrificed, especially if black castles queenside. The other idea is bishop c6 though, and that might be useful if ever the bishop can be liberated down the diagonal, but that's unlikely to happen usually because white will not usually remove the blockade on this d pawn. So it's a bit unusual to see this bishop hemmed in now by its own pawn on d5. Now Fischer castles and we see knight d7, which is the idea. From knight d7 instead of c6, the knight can maybe exert more influence for an f6 break later, but also perhaps betraying the idea knight b6 might be useful to attack again a4. Bishop a3, which was actually designed to prevent knight b6, because there will be bishop takes c5, and if say knight takes a4, maybe bishop d6. Okay. But Fischer in his notes gives knight g5 here as more like precise than bishop a3. So this is the first evidence of a loss of precision. Knight g5, it's difficult to see what black does actually in this position, because it's preventing black casting unless he wants to lose the exchange to knight takes f7. So what does black do? If he plays h6, then as Fischer's notes indicate, as well as technical engine analysis, which I've done, queen h5 is really annoying here. If g6, queen h3, or even the sacrificial knight e6 might give some compensation, but queen h3, and what is black doing here? It's difficult for black to do something in this position. White is better. Let's just check briefly again. What does actually black do? Suggested moves. Well, certainly not castling. Can't defend f7 easily because h6 will drop. That can't be used as a sacrifice, surely. I mean, it's a 5-minute game, but no. In this position, black could wait then. Say knight b6. I'm wondering, you see, what the idea after attacking a4 will become. Okay, knight c4 might justify the bishop on c6. So say knight f3 now. But what if the knight's left there? Okay, knight f5. So we get the idea. Black has a few moves available here. With knight f5 actually is protecting f7. So that's a really good plan as an idea to sort of justify the bishop being hemmed in by the pawn on d5. Okay, so for those curious, what would black do against that? That seems like a logical thing. And actually, you know, it is an interesting point about the bishop on c6. If the knight can come to c4, it's teasing open for white to take and then liberate that bishop on c6. Okay, so Fischer chose bishop a3, which is more in his general routine, to exploit those weak and dark squares. Now we see h6. Okay, preventing now knight g5. But maybe, you know, black could have just castled. But let's go on. Rook e1. Now we see b6. Okay. And it looks as though potentially bishop takes a4 might sneakily be on in this position. With the pawn protecting c5 now, bishop takes c5 might be answerable with bishop takes a2 and then takes, possibly. So Fischer's next move apparently did have some designs to indirectly defend the a4 pawn. As we'll see, bishop takes a4, which Fischer describes as risky. Now the idea of knight d2 is revealed. D takes c5 means actually that the bishop's prone to a horizontal attack with queen g4 here. So after takes queen g4 is double attacking. So white's getting his pawn back, and now he's getting another pawn. Okay, and now it seems black started to be a bit in trouble. Petrosian seems to slip up in this 5-minute game with knight takes e5 because apparently there's a really strong move here. I wonder if you can spot it in this position after knight takes e5. So what would you play here if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay, the really strong move is not what Fischer played, bishop takes c5, which he regards as a blunder, but actually queen f4, which I think from his post-mortem, and it's clear. I mean, it's pretty clear this is crushing. But c4 has to be accounted for if black plays c4, counter-attacking the bishop on d3. But let's look. Bishop f1. Let's say knight g6 now is afforded because the bishop's just been kicked, so it can't play bishop takes g6. But now queen g5, and this looks as though black might be in trouble because c4 comes at some cost. It's weakened the dark squares a bit more. Black can't easily castle. Queen d8 can be answered with rook takes e5 here. Technically, you know, queen g5, rook takes g5. So what will black do here? Black will be in trouble. In Fischer's notes to this, after the bishop f1, which facilitates that knight g6, he notes here that black's practically in zugzwang, as white now threatens h4 and h5. And it is difficult to see what black does here. The dark squares have basically been opened up. White's h-pawn is quite apparent if black cannot routinely castle here. Engine evaluation here. Can black really do nothing in this position? It seems advantage to white, but maybe knight d7. Let's follow this through. g3 is sort of prophylaxis on the g file. And now queen d8. Maybe it's not so bad from the point of view of a 5-minute game if black can start to wriggle out. And this G file, it would seem in theory it would give black counter chances, and indeed knight h4 as a resource is now evident. So maybe it's not that bad, this position for black. So it's interesting anyway that, you know, maybe it's this idea of c4 and knight g6 which puts Fischer off playing queen f4. Of course, queen f4, knight g6, you just snap it off. You just play bishop takes g6 and then win a piece short for black here, and it was noted in Fischer's notes. Okay, so let's return back. Bishop takes c5 was played, which has the side effect though that this d pawn is now mobile. So Fischer's, you know, not only unblockaded the d pawn, he's giving an opportunity for black to play d4, and Petrosian takes this opportunity. So the classic bad bishop is now pretty dangerous bishop on c6, and it seems as though, you know, to a large extent, Petrosian's opening strategy with this bishop d7 to c6 has been vindicated at this point. He's got sufficient counterplay, it would seem. Bishop e4, challenging the bishop, d takes c3, Fischer took on c6, and now a blunder from Petrosian. Instead of recharging the pressure on this diagonal, he takes with the knight. Fischer indicates queen takes c6. Of course, you know, it looks natural, looks attacking, and is the best move. Now, engine inspection, say knight e4, check. So if Fischer gives up the exchange here, rook takes e1. Okay, this is difficult, it seems, that black can't castle because he'd be hanging this knight. And it also seems other big problems immediately to be faced, like knight f6 check. But in fact, black in this position would have had a fantastic resource, and maybe Petrosian missed this, that in this position he can just simply castle queenside, leaving the knight hanging, because here I wonder if you can spot the resource in this variation. From black's point of view, black to play, if I give you 10 seconds. Okay, black would have queen takes e4 in this variation. So this is all sort of justifying, you know, if rook takes e4, rook d1 is mate with the back row weakness. So this is justifying that the natural queen takes c6 actually would have been really strong. Queen takes c6, just cheekily threatening mate. Again, allowing knight e4 with seemingly menacing, you know, consequences for these dark squares. But it seems tactically castling queenside is fine. So Petrosian played the feebler kind of knight 7 takes c6, which is given a double question mark, I believe, by Fischer. So, okay. There's also another tactical line. Before we move on from this, this is a very sharp idea now. If king f1, there's also some notes from Fischer. Knight d2, check. Knight takes d2, c takes d2, winning a piece because the rook and the bishop are attacked. Okay, so let's move on from that. Knight 7 takes c6, knight e4, black castles, rook ed1, and now another slip up from Petrosian. So he had, you know, a good position with this blasting rook down the g file. This is very dangerous from the perspective of a 5-minute game to try and defend against nasty like threats which are generated, and the queen, you know, is eyeing h2, and it's with this h2 eyeing that Petrosian is tempted to play knight g4, but this might be, you know, a major inaccuracy here. Apparently, you know, playing the check was more accurate. If black plays the check here, if king h1, again, black can go for the h2 pawn with rook h8. And this would be quite troublesome for white. He has got a very strong resource against this, it seems, in the form of bishop d6. So if rook takes d6, well, you can take on h8. And if take on h6, you're still defending after bishop c7, the h2 pawn. And so threatening, you know, takes as well. But here, black would have a lot of play. d8, and black's got a lot of play. So this wouldn't be that pleasant. So, yes, Petrosian let Fischer off here by playing, actually, knight g4. It seems a natural move, though, justifying the queen on c7. But it allows Fischer to play queen h4, just holding on to the pressure of the knight, so there's no rook h8 without losing the knight. and also, you know, it's eyeing usefully dark squares. Rook takes d1, a couple of rooks come off, and now f5, but now knight d6 check, and it seems black's attack's been neutralised, and white is on the offensive now after knight b5. So queen g7, check, rook b1, and the black king is getting it now. So Petrosian, who's usually not letting opponents attack him, he's got precarious king position here. After queen g3, Fischer's not just eyeing the dark squares logically, but also threatening queen c3 if the queen dares move off c3. But also the knight's on it as well. So actually, queen b7 was played, which looks, you know, like a time control kind of pressure move, you know, but it is eyeing g2, so maybe he's looking for some cheapo tactic. It is after all a 5-minute game. Knight takes c3 though, evicts the queen from b7. Queen a6. Okay, and now the knight's attacked. Knight f6, and now queen h4. So the worst is over on this g-file, and again, Fischer is threatening now to potentially come in using horizontal movement, maybe to a4, get the queens off here. He's also attacking f6, of course. There's no major direct threat of this queen on any key square or major entrance point here across this diagonal. So black's attack is not looking as significant as earlier. Black's missed some chances. Knight d7, retreating back, always a bad sign. Queen h7, attacking the attacking piece, driving it back defensively. Queen f7, attacking the vulnerable e6 pawn, not so easy to defend. Queen c4 is trying to defend that. Rook b3, undermining the defender potentially soon, but for the moment attacking c3. So in this position, if white gets in, maybe a knight move and then rook c3, a knight move somewhere soon, knight b5 is the most aggressive and logical, then rook c3 will be threatened, embarrassing the queen on the c-file. So the queen was eager to get off c4 here. Petrosian plays queen d4, just letting e6 go, actually. But apparently there is a strong move here. Maybe, you know, both sides are in pressure. Knight d4 is given as a strong move in Fischer's notes. So let's have a quick look at this position. I know one shouldn't really analyse 5-minute games, but this is against, you know, two former world champions. Knight d4 sort of minimises white's advantage here to 0.39. There's no rook b8 mate or anything, because the queen's actually covering c7, so there's no decoy or anything. Queen's not threatening mate because of that, protecting it. So knight d4 was the best move. So say rook a3, queen c6, black's still alive. But in the game continuation, queen d4, you know, it's going to +8, +9. A lot of crushing moves here. Queen e6 is one of them. So queen takes e6. So if this knight's move, it's going to be rook b8 mate, for example. Queen f6, and now queen d5. It's all over the black king safety. Fischer's completely dominating the position here. Knight de5. So it seems, you know, black's attack used up resources. Even when they were going for the g-file attack, they became a bit distracted away from black's king. And Fischer's like manoeuvred all his pieces into aggressive locations. So knight b5 now. Okay. Threatening all sorts of things. Immediate threat might be knight takes a7. And if knight takes, then queen b7 is mate. So getting this c6 out of the way. It looks as though it's all over. Queen f7. Okay, defending b7 and a7 for the moment. But queen c5. Threatening simply bishop takes e5 because of that nasty pin now. Desperate check. Rook takes f3. Not g takes, because that might allow some tricks on the g file potentially. But it looks fairly desperate. Just rook takes f3. After king d7, well, it's all over. Rook d3. And here, Petrosian resigned. So it was a bit of cut and thrust this game. There seemed to be a lot of counterplay that Petrosian generated from his novel idea of bishop d7 to c6. It seems as though though d takes c5 did turn out okay for white eventually, even giving black all this counterplay on the g file and across the diagonal, because it seems, you know, the black king safety, when black finally does castle on the queen side, if he doesn't get his attack right here with precise moves, it seems the black king safety on the queen side is a little bit suspect in this position. So the precise move knight f3 here would have really helped black. But no, knight g4, and Fischer became, you know, if you can parry this attack, look at the dark squares, they're a bit weakened all over the shop. There's things to pick up here, and it does start falling to pieces for black. You know, things start getting to the king. The queen is not particularly useful on a6, and again, these queen movements, you know, threatening all the time to come in and pushing away black's offensive pieces to make them more defensive. So here, making that defensive, that rook. So the knight and rook have been tamed, and now going for the pawn structure here. Latent threats in this position, like knight b5 and rook c3, encourage queen d4. Knight d4 would have helped, but now queen takes e6. It's all coming to bits, black's position. Remember, it's only a 5-minute game, so the errors and things, you know, considering it's a 5-minute, it was a fantastically dynamic French defence game, really. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.